Today we have a privilege and the honor to visit with George Ott. He's a native of North Dakota. His home is Dickinson, North Dakota. He flew B-17s, flying fortresses in World War II over Germany, and he was shot down on one of the most famous battles we have in World War II over Germany. He's been quite active in the ex-POW organization here in North Dakota. Was commander for a number of years. And now we're going to listen to George tell us how he won the war there. And you can just start right out, George, telling us when you were born and where you come from and on and on. Go ahead.
Okay. I was born on the farm south of New England in August 26, 1919. And went to grade school and a country school. Went to St. Mary's at New England, graduated all 4 years at St. Mary's, graduated from high school at St. Mary's. And then I went to Dickinson State Teachers College and took pre-med. And I had 2 years of pre-med. And I also belonged to the North Dakota National Guard, Company K at Dickinson. And when Company K went to Louisiana for maneuvers in 1940, the company commander, well, he ended up Brigadier General Richards, asked me if I wanted to stay with Company K or get a discharge. I took the discharge from Company K, applied for flying cadets, passed the examinations for flying cadets, and was sworn in as a flying cadet at Thanksgiving Day, 1940. And there were about 7 of us from North Dakota that were sworn in that day in Fargo. And my first school was Parks Air College at East St. Louis for primary. We were class 41E, the first class to fly the Fairchild PT-19, which was a monoplane. Graduated there, went to Randolph Field for basic, and
that BT-13?
That was the BT-13s there, and it was kind of a dangerous airplane. If you didn't know what to do, you could get in trouble with a BT-13. And at Randolph, if you made your basic, you were considered you were going to make it through flying school. So most of the cadets then would go down and sign up for a car, which I did. I bought a 1940 Chevy convertible that I kept until I had to go overseas. Anyway, from Randolph Field, our class was split, went to Kelly and Brooks Field. Some of us went to Brooks Field, and some of us in that class were chosen as observation pilots, which was a different schedule than a regular pilot. And after we graduated there in July 11th, 1941, the first station that I was directed to was B-25s at Pendleton, Oregon. And while at Pendleton, we were sent, 4 of our flight crews were sent to Englewood to ferry B-25s up to Pendleton because they were just building the B-25s and just organizing this group. It was the 17th Bomb Group. My squadron commander in the 95th Squadron was a guy by the name of Ski York, who, during the Tokyo raid, was shot down and landed in Russia and remained a prisoner of war in Russia the entire duration of the war. And at Pendleton...
Did he come back after the war?
Yes, he come back after the war. Now, while at Pendleton, after December 7th, 1941, we were put on patrol, submarine patrol in the Pacific. And we would fly out through the Dalles on the Columbia River because the weather generally was pretty bad. And we'd fly right on the Columbia River out to Portland and then do our patrolling, and then come back on the Columbia. You couldn't do that today because of the power lines. And the day before Christmas, December 24th, 1941, I was a co-pilot of a B-25. Brick Holstrom was the pilot. We got credit for sinking the first Japanese sub on the West Coast. Then when...
That's the first submarine.
The first
Japanese
Japanese
submarine.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my wife was out in the West Coast at that time, and she remembers the submarines shelling oil refinery. I think it was north of San Francisco someplace. And so that's what we were doing, is trying to get the submarines. Then when the 95th or the 17th group had their orders to train at Eglin Field for transport on the Hornet, the USS Hornet, to bomb Japan, I was made a squadron commander of the 95th, at which time they switched the airplanes to a B-17. I was checked out in the B-17, made a flight instructor. From there, went to MacDill Field, the old 29th, or the original 29th group, which was the forerunner of the 92nd Bomb Group, B-17s. And I was a B-17 instructor for the pilots there. Then, about July of 1942, we had orders to get things together. We were going overseas. So we flew to Dow Field at Bangor, Maine. And while at Bangor, Maine, I was chosen the pilot to fly from Bangor, Maine to the Bahamas to get the range of a B-17, because our intentions were to fly from Gander at Newfoundland directly to England.
Now on the screen I noticed there's a picture of, that's of you with your...
That is my primary, pictured primary at...
had the goggles and the...
East St. Louis. And the Gosport.
leather?
Oh yes, everything was leather. And the Gosport's out of your ear, you know. There were tubes that your instructor, flying instructor had. And
rather than mechanical, electrical, they had
that's
air.
Well, that's right. You couldn't talk back. You could hear what he was saying, but you couldn't talk back to him.
Yeah, well, that's a nice picture of you there. Yeah.
Well, the Air Force tried to make it nice because they were recruiting at that time.
Okay, go ahead. You were...
Well, then this mission from Bangor, Maine to the Bahamas, and then I dead reckoned to Miami, and I flew north. I didn't think I could make it to New York to Mitchell Field, because at that time we'd all fly into Mitchell Field. So I landed at Norfolk, at the naval base at Norfolk, Virginia. But that proved that even without the long-range Bombay tanks, that the B-17 could fly just with their wing gas to England.
From Newfoundland? Or,
from Gander, Newfoundland, and then the Great Circle route.
Yeah.
And so then in August, we flew from Dow to Gander, and I think it was August 12th, and that was another 13-hour flight. I was a flight leader on the first B-17 group to fly from the United States to Prestwick, Scotland.
Did you have your crew? Were you flying with your crew now, combat
Yeah, you had
crew?
your combat crew, and that was the only time that anybody had pulled rank on me. My navigator's name was McNeely, Robert McNeely, and the next man in the squadron is a guy by the name of Grand Montaigne. His serial number was 100 number or digits lower than mine. He commandeered my navigator because I had the reputation of having the best navigator in the group. And we were the first squadron to fly. So I got another navigator, and he took my navigator, but we all made it anyway. And so from there, after we got to Prestwick, we flew to a place just north of London called Bovington. And we set up the 1st and 11th Combat Crew Replacement Center for the 8th Air Force.
How many crews now were there planes in that group?
We had 7, 14, 28 B-17Es. And when we set up this 1st and 11th Combat Crew Replacement Center, some of our B-17s were taken then and given to different groups that were over there that were just beginning on their combat flying. And our job was to train these new crews coming from the United States in combat flying. And after we had that school set up, then some of us went on combat tours, and my squadron commander asked me if I wanted to stay and train pilots or come along and be up for combat. So I went along as for combat. Then while up there, we went to a place called Alconbury, which now had been one of the big RAS bases. And I understand now it's being sold. And at Alconbury, I checked out in a number of British airplanes. One of them was the Hawker Hurricane, the English fighter, the night fighter, and also a bomb trader, as I was sent to Oxford to learn their instrument flying procedure. And then I come back to the group and was about to set up this instrument flying school when I was made the squadron commander of the 325th Squadron. But I'm getting ahead of my story. Before that, in January of 1943, 4 officers and 7 enlisted men from the 92nd Group were sent back to the United States on a secret mission to train and bring back to England a modified B-17 called a YB-40, which was, well, it was modified with 2 extra turrets and 4 extra 50 caliber machine guns in the waist and the nose. And we never carried any bombs on our missions. All we did was carried about 14,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition and tried to keep the fighters away from the lead airplane, because the German fighters, when they'd queue up in the front, that's what they come after, was a lead airplane.
Did you fly in the lead then with that ship?
I was always flying in the lead, either number 2 or number 3.
Without bombs, just with
That's
guns?
right. Just nothing but the guns.
Nothing but the guns.
And we never carried a bombardier.
Oh,
We
okay.
carried an extra gunner. We had, that's where your B-17G model has a chin turret. That come from the YB-40. We also had an extra turret in the top at the radio room, which they took out because they figured with the top turret and the twin 50s in the waist, that would be sufficient. They didn't prove out too successfully, so in August, my airplane, the Dakota Demon, was transferred to the 303rd Group and then was made a regular B-17 bomber.
Now, how many missions had you flown now, if any?
I had flown, I suppose about 4 missions before we were sent back to the United States.
I see. Four combat missions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it could have been a decoy mission in there too. But you weren't, that wasn't considered a combat mission. You didn't have combat hours on a decoy mission.
But you, in other words, you flew one place and someone else was going another place?
Yes, that's right.
A group or a wing or...
Yeah, the main force would go in for the target, and we'd try to decoy the fighters away so there wouldn't be so many fighters.
Yeah.
And then, with the YB-40, it weighed so much more than a regular B-17 that the crew tried to keep it clean so there were no oil spots underneath, under the superchargers or along the side of the fuselage. And one day we were working on my airplane, the Dakota Demon, when the squadron commander call down to the hard stand, and he said, Ott, get your crew and fly down to Bassingbourn to the 91st.
Say, just a minute. Now we got a picture of the Dakota Demon there on the screen.
That's my airplane there.
And that's your crew?
That's my crew on the Dakota Demon.
Now, where are you in that picture? Just, I think is going to show you.
Okay.
I think you're pretty close to the center there, aren't you?
That's right. The prop, the bottom of the prop, I'm on the right side of the prop, and the co-pilot, Lieutenant Wood, is on the left side.
Yeah.
And McNeely, the navigator that I was outranked on my first trip, is next to me.
I see, yeah. And that's the plane you were shot down in?
No.
Oh, excuse me, okay.
No, this was the German destroyer airplane. That's what
this
the
one
Y,
here?
Yeah, that's what the YB-40 was.
That was
strictly
your purpose, yeah.
Yeah, just strictly a destroyer airplane.
Yeah. But you got credit for those missions you
Oh,
flew.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Anyway, on...
now there's I see there's a picture of you.
That's being...
Yeah. Did you, when you flew those missions, do you recall did you wear that uniform, the leather jacket?
That's exactly the one that I...
And you had the headphones over
the headphones over the top.
And the oxygen mask over?
That's right.
Did you start using oxygen as soon as you took off, or did you wait until
No, we waited until we got to 15,000 feet.
I see. We turned it on as soon as we left the ground.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, no one said anything, and we just...
Yeah, no, we never turned on the oxygen until we got to 15,000.
Yeah. Could you tell us, maybe that's the right way, could you tell us a little bit about getting ready for that mission? You talked about the hard stand a minute ago and what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what that is and how you were briefed on any one of these missions. Who briefed you and how long and what you were told and so on and so forth.
Okay.
What time you woke up and what you eat and so on.
Okay. All right. Now, previous to a mission, the 8th Air Force headquarters would send the orders to the groups with the target, the bomb load, the time to take off, and also the way in, your turns, and your way out. Generally, you were awakened at 4 o'clock in the morning. You went to the mess. That's one time where you had fresh eggs. Whenever you were on a mission, you had fresh eggs instead of powdered eggs, and even the enlisted men. And after breakfast, you went to the briefing room. The navigators and the bombardiers went to their special rooms where they were briefed on the number of bombs, the weight, and how to set the intervalometer, which designated the space the bombs would hit on the ground, and then the time. Then you went to the briefing room.
This was in a Quonset, perhaps?
This was in generally a steel Quonset.
Rounded one?
Yes.
Yeah.
And although at Alconbury we had some permanent buildings to go with there because it was a well-known RAF base. But that's where we went. The Quonset was our briefing room. And the colonel, the commanding officer, walked up on a stand like we're sitting on.
Yeah.
And here was a big map in the back, covered up. And when everybody was there, then the briefer would come in. He'd pull the cover of the map back, and you saw that long, thin red line, especially the mission I was shot down on, was deep into Germany.
I saw a couple guys when they saw that red line. They went crazy. They keeled over on the floor just white as a sheet.
Yeah, that's right.
This was tough. That was a tough one when they pulled that curtain.
Yeah, they had August 2 months before. They had gone to Regensburg and Schweinfurt, and then to Africa, which didn't prove too successful because they kind of run out of fuel. But the second Schweinfurt mission was maximum effort. We only had 300 B-17s in England at the time, and I was supposed to lead the entire mission that day until Colonel Peasley from the 8th Air Force come down to our group He was assigned the mission leader. I was the deputy lead on the 2nd Schweinfurt mission.
Was he in the same plane as you? Or did
No,
have,
he had a different airplane.
He had a different airplane. Okay.
He was flying number 1, I was flying number 2.
Okay.
And
Getting back now to the mission, we've gone to the briefing room and had
Yeah.
that.
that long red line. And,
I know.
And
Yarn. Wool yarn.
Yeah, that's right. And we were briefed on, if I remember correctly, 1,200 German fighters against 300 B-17s, and there were only about 220 of the B-17s made the mission. The rest of them either aborted because of mechanical failure or things like that. Yeah. And that's what we had to contend with. It, to me, was the most totally brutal mission that I'd ever been on. They'd line up in front of us, 20 or 30 at a time.
But now, before you get there, tell me what happened on the ground. After you left the briefing room,
okay.
You went to the hard stand.
Okay, after the briefing room, then you went outside, and each crew would have a jeep that would come pick the crew up with your parachutes and the crew, and you'd go to the hard stand. That's where your B-17 was parked. And then you would start to dress up. You'd put on, the gunners, especially the waist gunners, would put on their insulated sheepskin leather clothing and see that their electrical plugs were working because they'd plug into the heaters. Same thing with your tail man. He'd have all that heavy clothing and plugged in for his heat. And
did you have flak suits?
Yes, we had flak suits, which generally we sat on.
Yeah.
We
did you have chest packs?
Yes, we had the new British chest pack, because we didn't have room in the seat to have a backpack.
Yeah.
And if you had a pack that you sat on, you sat up too high. So all we had is a harness, yeah, and you had your chest pack next to your seat.
Yeah.
And then before, on this last mission, even the chaplain come and he gave each crew a blessing.
Right there on the hard stand?
Right on the hard stand.
Before you took off?
Right next to your B-17.
Yeah.
And he gave us a blessing. And we got in the B-17s, and then you watched. It was a very miserable day.
Did you have a putt-putt machine? I mean, one little machine?
Oh, yes. You had your little Briggs and Stratton going.
Going, yeah.
And that was in the waist of a B-17. In case your batteries weren't strong enough to get the number one going, that had the generator to start the rest of the engines. You had that little auxiliary generator going. But then we got into the B-17 or the YB-40 and checked everything, saw that your flaps worked, started your engines, loosened your controls, and then you waited for the flare. Because then the tower, and this day was a horrible day. It was just about zero visibility, right on the ground, clouds right on the ground. We all took off on instruments, and about 12,000 feet is when we cleared. And then you fly to a designated marker, radio marker, and you would assemble around this marker, continually gaining altitude at 300 to 500 feet a minute until you got to your designated altitude, until your whole group was assembled. Then you'd fly to some more markers so the wing could assemble. So you'd have 3 groups assembled to a wing. Yeah. And then that was your combat wing, and that's when you'd start across the channel and climbing all the time to your designated altitude. On the Schweinfurt mission, it was 25,000 feet.
Now, where's Schweinfurt now? Where was that from?
That's if you look on a map of Germany, on Frankfurt on the Main River,
Yeah.
that is on one end of the W that the main river makes, and you can see it as plainly as can be. The Main makes a great big W, and the top of the W on the right side, look there, and there's Schweinfurt. It's just about the southeastern part of Germany.
It's about 200-300 miles then south of, southwest of Frankfurt.
Oh, yes.
Maybe
yes.
more.
Yeah. Frankfurt is right on the east side of, on the west side of Germany, and
That's right.
Schweinfurt is way down in the southwest corner.
Yeah, south in the southwest corner.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the ball bearing factory, I think. isn't
That
it?
was the ball bearing factory.
Yeah.
And that's what my Waterloo was. I was
Well, what happened now as you was going towards the target there?
everything was going along nicely. We had fighter escort, Spitz and P-47s until about halfway through Belgium. And as soon as they left, because they didn't have the gas to escort any further, as soon as they left, the German fighters started to hit us. And you could tell that they were firing at you. You'd see what looked like confetti. You'd see these little gold flashes under the the Focke-Wulf 190s and 109s and ME 210s and everything else. You could see these flashes, and that was the spent cartridges dropping and flashing in the sunlight. And you knew right away they'd opened up on you.
Did they come from the front or the
Directly
side?
from the front.
Directly from
Yeah.
up through the
Not just about straight on.
straight up.
And they'd come at you, fire their guns, roll over on their back, peel down, go out ahead, climb, come back at you again. And 10 to 20 at a time would attack directly from the front.
Attack a group.
Yes. And they had their 20-inch Ju-88s, ME-210s, shooting rockets from the tail. They'd stay about 1,000 yards out so that the tail gunners couldn't reach them, and they'd lob rockets into the B-17 formations. That day, they were even dropping bombs into the B-17 formations. They'd get about a mile on top of us, drop a bomb, timed device that would burst inside of the formation. I've never had been on any mission like that.
How many planes did they shoot down that day? I mean, say of
Yeah, well, 60 were shot down over Germany and the lowlands, and another 62 were so damaged that they never flew again. So out of the 220 airplanes that flew over the target, over 50% were destroyed.
Now, what about your plane? The plane you had now? How were you hit, or what were you hit?
I was flying, and I lost an engine over Aachen, number 3 prop runaway, so we had to feather that. So from then on, it was full power to keep up with the leader, as I was the deputy lead.
Yeah.
Then here comes ME 109 low about 2 o'clock, and just, well, one of these frontal attacks come in underneath and just totally blew us out of the sky. The bombardier was killed. The astro hatch was blown off.
That's the hatch on top of the plane. Yeah.
The navigation hatch in the front, right here.
Oh yeah.
And
Here you can show. There.
Yeah.
Okay.
This,
Tell how the fighters come at you now from there.
okay, they'd come straight ahead, straight at you. And mine, the 109, come in low and up and just totally, it's just like running into a cement wall because they have a 20-millimeter cannon coming out of their nose. And that's what they were fighting. But it blew, he got a direct hit, blew this hatch off. Well, the bombardier had just started to shoot. He got probably 2 shots when he got hit directly in the head with a cannon shell.
And was instantly killed.
Well, he was instantly killed. His head blew off and totally smeared this side of the windscreen. I couldn't see out of the
With
windscreen.
blood?
Yeah, blood and brains and gore.
Yeah.
And I had a little corner down here is the only place I could see out. And we were on fire.
Plane was burning?
Yeah, they set us on fire. And
How about the other crew members now?
everything was all right.
They were okay. Okay.
Yeah, I still got some flack. You can see it in
Oh yeah.
here
Yeah.
from the mission, and everybody else was okay. And well, the oxygen tanks under the top turret, they were on fire. So we had to get out. We bailed out.
Did the emergency bell ring?
Pardon?
Did the emergency bell ring? Did you have that?
Oh yeah, we had that, and I even notified the crew.
Yeah.
But we had flown over the target. We were burning and flew over the target, toggled the bombs, and after that, I told the crew to bail out. Everybody bailed out except the top turret gunner. And I thought, my God, it's burning, but maybe the fire will go out, because this Major Keck, he got an EFC for bringing a B-17 back with the tail burned off, so I thought maybe I could. But it was getting too hot, and he bailed out. And I was sitting there, and here a ME-210 flew over my left wing, and all kinds of holes. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I figured if he wanted it that bad, he could have it, so I bailed out. And
If you wanted the plane, you mean?
yeah, if he wanted that one that hard, he could have it. But it was on fire, so it's better to get out of it anyway. And all the crew
Hooked up your parachute?
yeah, I put it on like this and give it a quarter of a twist, and it locks.
Yeah.
So I went out the little hatch under the pilot.
Yeah.
I didn't pull the D-ring because they told us at that altitude we didn't have oxygen on our chutes at that time. So they suggested that we wait for a while before we pull our D-rings for the chute to open, otherwise we'd be up at high altitude without any oxygen. Well, after we got to prison camp, they figured out that I was about 600 feet when I pulled the ripcord, because as soon as it opened up, I don't think it was 1 minute later, I landed in a dug potato patch. It was October 14, and next to a tree. And here an old gentleman, an old German home guard, he was probably 70 years old, and the front end of that old rifle looked like a black hole about an inch big, and that was pointed right at my head, and he told me in German, and I could understand German. He said, for me, the war was over, which it was, and took us to a small town where...
Was he the only one there, basically?
He was the only one there at that time.
What about the other crew members? Were they around?
They were different places. They were captured at different areas. And we went to one place. Well, there were no authorities there, so they walked us, probably 5 or 6 kilometers to another place where there was a higher authority. And this German gentleman, he was an official, a policeman of some sort. He was trying to interrogate me on how many members were in my crew. And he'd reached down where his little stove heater was, and he had some wood, chopped wood. And he'd pick up 6 or 7 of these pieces of wood and drop it. And I just looked him in the eye, and I just shook my head. And he did that about 6 or 7 times. And I knew what he wanted. He wanted to find out how many members were in the B-17. And I just look at him and shake my head, and he finally got so mad, he took off his cap, threw it on the ground, and started to cuss in German and just started to stomp on his cap. Then the bus came with all these prisoners of war, or flyers that had jumped out that they had captured.
Of other planes, or yours?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And from there, they took us to Stalag Luft, which is the interrogation center at Frankfurt on the Main.
Did it take you directly there?
Yeah, a bus right away from there, right to Frankfurt.
To Frankfurt.
It's a little ways out of Frankfurt.
Yeah, on the north side.
Yeah,
About
Dulag,
10 miles or so.
That's right.
Yeah.
And right next to this place was Messerschmitt Aerodrome, because I could look out of my little cell and wonder, how in the devil can I get out of here to get to that ME-109? Because I'd get in it and hope the thing was full of gas and see if I'd know enough German yet to take it off. And that was quite an experience at Stalag Luft 3. I was a major, the only...
Well, Stalag Luft, what about the, you're not, I mean, at the interrogation center now, what happened?
That was it. That was Stalag Luft.
Oh, yeah, Stalag Luft. Okay.
Yeah, that was the interrogation center.
Okay, yeah.
Anyway, they kept me there about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Oh, once a day, they'd take me out
Yeah.
and ask me a few questions, stick me back in the cell. And this was a cell about 4 by 8, or maybe 6 by 8,
Yeah.
and with a 2-foot bed.
Yeah.
In the daytime, they turned up the heat. They had electric heater in there. They turned up that heat so you fried. At night, absolutely no heat, and they'd open the window so you froze. And that, I think, was intentional to break you down. And they kept me there for 2 weeks, thinking that I must know something, because I was pretty young and had...
What rank were you then?
I was a major.
You were a major.
And so they kept me there for 2 weeks. They finally got tired of me, and they put me on a train to Stalag Luft 3. And the first...
Did you go to Wetzlar from there? Did you ever go to that camp?
No, never did. Just
that was a way station, you know, too,
Yeah.
for some guys, yeah.
No, we went directly to Stalag Luft 3.
Yeah. And now, where's Stalag Luft 3 from Berlin?
It's southeast of Berlin, right on the Oder River. Its demarcation line is Poland and Germany.
Yeah, they have the Frankfurt on the Oder, Frankfurt on the Rhine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were on the Oder.
Yeah, and this was halfway between Berlin and Breslau.
Yeah, okay.
And that was at one time the main RAF prison camp. But in 1943, when they started to shoot down so many B-17s, that's where the Americans went. They had the center compound with a couple thousand prisoners, the south compound with a couple thousand, the west compound with a couple thousand or more, and the north compound, which were the RAF. And that was the main RAF officer compound.
And now, when you speak of a compound, what is that? What do you mean by that?
That was an area of land encircled by barbed wire and goon towers.
Yeah.
And all of these compounds make up the entire camp.
How many buildings were there in there?
Oh,
Barracks or blocks? 10 or so?
Oh, yes. Each compound had about 10 or more barracks. Yeah. And as high as 240 men to a barracks towards the end of the war.
Yeah.
And you were packed in like sardines. Yeah. My God, you couldn't move.
Yeah.
And the first man that hollered at me at South Compound when I got there was my instructor from Randolph Field, by a guy by the name of Ralph Saltzman. He was my instructor at Randolph. He had beat me to prison camp. So then we were there at the South Compound, which was a very well-organized American compound. And they were shooting us down so fast that they had to enlarge the compound. The Germans did. They built another one called the West Compound. And there were 10 of us plus Colonel Alkire that went to the West Compound to set that up. He was a senior American officer. He was also the commanding officer of the 100th Bomb Group, which was a bomb group that got to be known during World War II as the Bloody 100th. And there's quite a story involved with that. We had a kind of an unwritten law or unwritten agreement with the German fighters that if a B-17 couldn't make her back or you were done, you dropped your wheels. And the German fighters wouldn't shoot at you, but you didn't shoot at them either.
Yeah.
You had to get out or land it, one or the other.
In Germany?
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of the crews of the 100th Bomb Group, they did that, and whenever the German fighters come up to escort them, they shot them down. Each group had an insignia on the tail. Ours was a triangle B, and each one of our wings, like the 40th Combat Wing, ours was a triangle A, B, or C, depending on what group. Our group was a triangle B. The 100th Bomb Group was a square with a letter in it. And the German fighters knew whatever group that they were shooting at,
Sure,
just by that.
Yeah.
But they found out, okay, this is the guy out of this group that did that. And from then on, they intentionally shot out the 100th Bomb Group, just totally cleaned them out of the sky.
Yeah.
They'd leave everybody else go, and they'd come after that 100th group. And I know of 3 times that they shot them out completely, 3 times.
Yeah.
One of my very good friends, Gail Cleveland, he was a squadron commander, 100th Bomb Group. He was shot down. Jones, they just intentionally did that.
Say, of those ships now that were shot down, what percentage would you say of the men in the crew lived, which ones, and how many died? 50-50 or so?
Okay, I know for a fact on the second Schweinfurt mission, of the 600 that were shot down that day, there were 220 already killed before they hit the ground.
220?
Yeah, these are statistics that I got from a German. I have the serial number of every airplane shot down, the serial number, rank, and name of every man that was shot down, and his disposition, what happened to him, and even in civilian life.
Yeah.
A German had sent that to me because it belonged to the Second Schweinfurt Memorial Organization, which is a non-profit organization. And so that was a tremendous loss, just the people that were shot down. That's not counting the number of people that were killed or wounded that got back to England. So that was a horrendous loss. In fact, they stopped deep penetration raids into Germany until fighters could escort us.
Were there any other raids on Schweinfurt after that? That was the second raid, you
That
say?
was the second. Oh, yeah, there were other raids
There were other,
after that,
okay.
but they had their fighter escort.
They had the fighter,
Yeah.
P-51s.
Yeah.
Now, getting back to the camp you were in now, you mentioned the large number of men there.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us something about the sleeping accommodations, the food, and the discipline, and so on and
Yes.
so forth? Mm-hmm. Or the clothing you had and so on?
Oh, the camp was highly organized. We had everything. We had intelligence. We got intelligence through radios, clandestine radios that we made or bribed the German guards out of. We knew what was going on all the time in the camps. In fact, we could even get out intelligence to England through different ways that we had. It was highly organized for escape committees. There were certain people secretly working on that. And there were people there that could forge. They made passports. They could make German buttons, made all uniforms. It was just completely organized. Our food ration was pretty slim from the Germans, consisting mostly of rutabagas and probably barley or pea soup. And I especially remember about the pea soup, it must have been cow peas, because whenever it was made, the beetles that always tried to dig into the germ of the pea, whenever it was boiled, they'd always float to the top. So all you did is got rid of the beetles and ate the soup. The Kriegies that come in, you know, a new purge that come in, the new ones, oh, they'd leave their soup go for once or twice.
Say, you mentioned the word Kriegie. Could you tell us what that meant?
Kriege is the corruption of the word, German word, Kriegsgefangenen, which means war prisoner.
Okay.
And so That's what we were known as Kriegies. The German guards were known as goons, and the Germans that come around with the police dogs dressed in parachute clothes, that's what they look like. Those were the ferrets. They were the guys that were trying to dig out the radios, your tunnels. They were the guys that were trying to do that. So
were your buildings built on stilts or on the ground?
Our buildings were built on, probably 16 or 18 inches above the ground.
Ours were about 4 foot, 5 foot.
Oh, they were that high?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, that's...
Yeah, and we tried to, our tunnels usually went out where the sewage went. That's where...
What about your, now in the room there where you were, how did you eat, or did you go someplace to get this food, or did it bring it to you, or how?
Okay, each compound had a kitchen where you got your German ration, and somebody from each room was designated every week to go to the kitchen and get your hot water in the morning for your coffee, or hot water at noon or in the evening. And if you weren't there in time, then the German guards would say, "Kein Trinkwasser." And so that's why the prisoners always had a half a wing, or their pitcher that you went to get your water was about half a pitcher, because if you didn't get there in time, you didn't get the hot water. Then each compound, each room was organized, so with your Red Cross parcels and your German ration, you had a cook. There was designated 1 or 2 men for 1 week. They had to do the cooking. And they had to be very meticulous when they put the ration out, that one guy didn't get more than the other. And I remember in the end room were the 3 of us. Every 3rd week it was my time to cook. I would put the ration out in 3 dishes, and I was the last one to choose. The other 2 chose their dish first, and I was the last one to choose. They even watched you while you were spooning a dish out with our clim cans, or our milk cans. That was our cooking instrument, or our dishes. But with your spoons, if you licked the spoon, something had to come off of your ration on the plate.
Did you have a bowl, a porcelain bowl, or just a can?
Generally, it was just a can, what you could say
can,
from your
Red
Cross parcels. And the Red Cross parcels consisted of a pound of milk. That was our clim can. We usually had a little can of margarine. We had goose liver pate, a chocolate bar, package of cigarettes, maybe some tooth powder, and some cookies, and graham crackers, which we made our pie crusts out of, some condensed milk, a little, probably 3 or 4 ounce can of condensed milk, and some dried fruit, which we usually bashed away, which meant kept, and then made our Kriege brew and our sugar. We made Kriege brew out of the dried fruit and our sugar. We weren't supposed to, but the German guards, whenever we opened up our brew, they were always invited in, because we could always buy things off of the German guards. Yeah. It was.
Of course, to them it was illegal too.
Yeah, oh yes, they would have been shot if they were caught doing things like that. But that's one of the ways that we bribed these German guards to get things that we couldn't get through our Red Cross parcels. And we also had a Red Cross man designated. Clandestine things were coming through the Red Cross parcels. We always knew when they were coming in, because through our intelligence, we knew what was coming and when to expect it. So then
Towards the end of the war, though, those parcels got pretty scarce.
Yes, they did. Although when we left Stalag Luft 3, when Russian artillery, when we could hear the Russian artillery at night about
Coming from the east.
From the east, we could hear the Russian artillery. The camp commandant, he said that we have to move out, and each compound was organized so that the senior American officer, all the block commanders, and it was just like a retreat, just like a company. You were marching out by companies.
Say, getting back to the camp now, what about roll call and so on?
Oh, a PAL every morning. The block commander had to get your troops out to the, well, normally it would be called a parade ground, but here was an area where all the prisoners of war would stand in ranks so that the Germans, the commanding officer, and the counters would come, and they'd walk past and count all the prisoners of war. But we try, if somebody had been gone, we tried to fill up. Well, to just step back or forth while you weren't looking. And usually we could get that done so the count would come out right. Then I'd have to go up as a block commander, go up and salute them and give them the number that I had. The guy that did the counting, he'd look and see if that number was right, then you were okay. So each compound then would be checked out like that.
What about your latrine facilities there, bathroom and so on?
Okay, we had no bathroom per se.
No.
We had one big building in the middle of the compound called an abort. And that was just a big cement hole that was covered up with one row of holes on one side, probably 20 or 30 on one side, with a 36-inch bulwark. The other side, that many more holes. And in the summer, it smelled to high heaven and flies. And every so often, about once a week, here the honey wagon and the two men on the honey wagon, they'd come and they'd throw that hose down into this abort and start pumping all this effluent into their tank pulled by two real thin, scrawny horses. When it was full, they'd pull the wagon out and go out someplace and fertilize the cabbage. And that was the main abort. Although each compound had, at night, that was the only time it was open, was a hole at night where if you were sick or something that you could go.
In the building?
In the building.
Yeah.
Because,
In the building.
yeah, at night when it was blackout, the windows were closed up, shut, tight, and no light could get out.
Yeah.
So, and there were shower houses that we'd go to probably once a week or later on, none at all.
No.
And no hot water. Hot water after we got to Camp Lucky Strike was heaven.
What about the water there in camp? How do they furnish that? With a spigot or running or?
Yeah, you had a spigot outside.
Yeah.
You had to go outside and get your water.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the hot water was at the main kitchen.
Yeah.
Because your ration of coal, I think, was a kilogram per prisoner a week.
Yeah. Was that the round brick?
It was a briquette. Yeah, a kilogram briquette, which would be a little over 2 pounds.
What about your clothes and things there?
That was furnished by the Red Cross and the YMCA, but generally it was the Red Cross, and it was generally a GI uniforms that they sent over. Your GI trousers, GI shirts. And something else, it was orders from our senior American officer. You kept yourself clean at all times. Beards, you weren't allowed a beard. You were allowed a mustache if it was trimmed and only 3 inches from the center of your nose out. That's as far as your mustache could go. Your clothes had to be as clean as possible under the circumstances. We even had irons that we made so that we could get our 3, this stripe down the front and 3 in the back. So we tried to keep ourselves as you were supposed to. You were supposed to be an officer,
What about haircuts and lice and so on?
Well, that we had plenty of lice, but our haircuts, we had people there that knew how to cut hair and trim their hair and that stuff. We had one, with people being so close together all the time and talking about sex all the time. I got an order from the commandant once, and it's here in this book, Stalag Luft 3. And he asked us black commanders about any activities like that. And as a black commander, I have never, ever experienced anything like it. Never one case that anything like that ever happened. And even the senior American officer, he says, thanks to the character and integrity of the American officer at Stalag Luft 3, that had never, ever come to the front.
Well, similar thing. I asked someone not so long ago if there was homosexual activity in camp, and this man said, this Krigie said, I never knew what the word meant until I got home.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely, and that the only time I had ever been approached by one of those guys was in a hotel in Dayton, Ohio, after I come back from overseas.
Yeah. Now, what about church and so on? Did you have any church? Did anybody go to church there? Or what were you, Catholic? Or?
Yes. We had a chaplain that had been captured. The fellow's name was MacDonald. He was an Englishman or Scotchman. He was captured in Africa in the beginning of the African campaign. And he was in the North Compound, and he used to come around to the different compounds and have church services. We also had a man in our own block, Lieutenant Newman, who had been a preacher before he got in the Air Force, and he conducted services. We had our own theater. We built our own seats out of Red Cross parcel boxes. The Germans allowed us to do that. We had our own band instruments sent in by the YMCA, books sent in by the YMCA. We had college courses that we could get credit for while we were in prison camp. And we had this good friend of mine, Bucky Cleveland. He taught advanced calculus while he was there in prison camp. Oh, it was highly organized to keep people busy, and something I can say of the German commandant, he didn't have any different ration than what we had.
Well, that he was, Germans ate the same thing? He
was one of the old-time Germans. He was honorable Luftwaffe German officer.
I see. Yeah.
He wasn't an SS. Boy, if you got the SS, you had hell.
Yeah.
But the Wehrmacht or the Luftwaffe, if you got those, you were all right.
Now what about doctor? Did they have a doctor there, or anybody whether some got sick, or maybe went mental or emotional problems?
Yes, we had people that had taken Red Cross courses before. They were in a separate area of the compound, and we had a sick call every day, and those that were really sick would go there. There wasn't any medicine, but if it was real serious, then the Germans would take you to their lazaret and check you over. And if you were sick, they'd put you in the hospital. Could I tell you about one
Sure,
individual?
Yeah.
He was a fellow from South Dakota. Melvin F. McNichol is the guy's name. He was a squadron commander of the 78th Fighter Group, was shot down, and when the cannon exploded in the cockpit, it knocked him out, and the P-47 crashed, and he crashed so hard that his seat harness kept him in the seat, but he broke every rib and his collarbone, and he was in the hospital. The Germans then rescued him out of this P-47, took him to the hospital, and he was in the hospital about 3 months before they brought him to Stalag Luft 3. And he healed together, come out, and he kept on. He retired as a major general.
He did.
So
Kind of a fate.
yeah, that's right. And I knew him well, and he had a twin brother too, and they were known as the McNichol twins, and they were probably class of 40 or something like that.
Yeah.
So they were in before I was,
Yeah.
and I met his brother at Dayton, Ohio. I was going up to the officers' club, and his brother was coming down. I said, "Hi, Melvin," and he looked at me. Oh, he says, "You must mean my brother," and he was in there too. So,
I see.
but they looked just exactly alike. But the Germans, they did the best, especially at Stalag Luft 3. They did the best that they could with what they had.
Yeah.
They tried to read the Geneva rights and to the letter of the law. They didn't give you any more, but they tried to give you what they said they should do. Towards the end of the war, after the Russians left, and we moved, or when the Russians were coming and we had to march out.
Tell me what, now the Russians are coming and you're going to march out. Now
Yes.
tell me what happened just as that.
Well, the Russians were coming, and they knew that they were going to get the camp. And Hitler had already put out the order to collect prisoners of war, either shoot them, or we're going to trade them off for a better peace. Excuse me. And that order had been already given down to the Germans. General Berger. There's another story. He was one of the Germans that had to disseminate that order to the different prison compounds. You at Luft 1, you also were supposed to be either liquidated or else traded off for a better peace. That's why all of us were sent down to Moosburg. We were supposed to go to the redoubt that Hitler had at the Alps. And that's where they caught most of us, was there at Moosburg. But when the Russians come, the order come to get the POWs out. So it was less than 2 hours. We had to get our clothes on, get as much food packed away.
Daytime or night? Or?
This was night. This was at midnight was the first call to get out. And the West Compound, we left at 3 o'clock that morning. And it was the worst winter that they had on record there at that time.
You marched which way, west?
No, yeah, we went west towards Spremberg was the name of the town. And it took us about 4 days. Snowing and colder than hell.
On the ground?
Yeah. And then we also had the refugees coming out of Poland ahead of the Russians. So it was a complete mess with the prisoners of war. They're trying to guard those. The refugees coming from Poland and their carts pulled by maybe an ox and a horse, and these poor people walking. Oh, it was horrible. And then they marched each compound out at a certain time, and you went so long, then you'd stop and rest, get you up, walk you another hour or 2 hours, stop you for 10 minutes, and that's the way it went. And during the daytime, then they'd stop us and we could rest. But there was no heat or nothing there.
Well, you just huddled together then on the side of the road? Or?
That's right. Yeah. Or behind barns or anything like that.
Did the Germans still have more or less control over you, or were they losing control?
Yeah, they were starting to give up.
Yeah.
And
the German guards and the Germans. Yeah.
Because they knew that things were gone. And then those that fell out, that were sick or something, the Germans did have a wagon that they'd load the sick ones on. And that's how they got it. It was 50-some miles that we marched from Sagen to Spremberg. And at Spremberg, they put us on freight
Were there quite a few people there that got to Spremberg then?
Yeah, they were.
Thousands?
Yeah, there must have been about, well, the whole Stalag Luft 3, over 10,000.
Yeah.
And they put them on 40 and 8, these freight cars. And some went to one compound or one place in Germany. Some in the south and the center, I think, went directly to Moosburg. And we, in the west compound, went to a slave labor camp at Nuremberg. And that was an honest-to-God hellhole. No air raid shelters or anything like that. And Nuremberg was being pounded every day by the RAF or by the 8th Air Force. At night, the RAF would pound it.
Did they know you were there?
Oh, yes, yeah. We also had 51 escorts then.
Oh, yeah.
And then they'd escort the B-17s, and they'd buzz the POW camp. Oh, what a beautiful sight. Oh, what a beautiful sight. I remember we were on go to the wash house one day when the B-17s bombed, and you'd swear you could walk up on the bombs. It looks just like a ladder. You know, you could just walk right up to the B-17.
They couldn't have been, well, how high were they?
They were down to 12 to 15,000 feet then towards the end of the war.
Yeah.
Then when one night we had a horrible air raid. That was the RAF. And that's when the Germans even shot into the compound because the men, no air raid shelters, and the flak and the airplanes crashing right next to our compound. I was a block commander and I had to walk around. I was scared as hell myself, and then I had to tell the boys, you know, to settle down, settle down. And I have never experienced anything like that in my life. Then when...
Were the Russians then, or...?
Yes, we even had POW, Russian POWs.
This is Moosburg?
This was at Moosburg.
Yeah.
Not at Nuremberg.
No.
This was just strictly Americans at Nuremberg.
Yeah.
Then when Patton broke through at the Remagen Bridge, then we had to march again south from Nuremberg to Moosburg. But that was a picnic. That was in April. Oh, yeah. And every time we had big sheets, and whenever we saw the Americans, we'd stop and put POW with sheets on the ground because we were strafed once. You know, they thought we were probably German troops.
Yeah.
And we had been shot into in the compounds by the Germans too during the air raids.
Yeah.
So then we got to Moosburg, and it wasn't long. We were there about 2 weeks. That was just a horrible place. So many of us, so many prisoners. There must have been close to 250,000 American prisoners. That's with all the flyers, all the sergeant flyers, infantry and everything. Then that's when Patton, they had a little battle, and Patton's tank, big Grant tank, crashed right over the top of the gate, and there was Patton. Most beautiful sight I've ever seen.
What happened then?
Oh, it was bedlam. It was bedlam. But they had to control us. They couldn't turn us loose. So we still stayed in the compound for another 2 or 3 days until they could get the transport at Landshut. We had to then, they were come in with the trucks to transport us to Landshut, where we got into C-47s and flown from there to Camp Lucky Struck at Le Havre.
Yeah.
And we were there for about 4 or 5 days, and eggnog and plenty of food and new rations. That's where they deloused us with the DDT and under our armpits and our
Get
crotches.
that new clothes and all that?
All the new clothes, that's right.
What, you don't remember just about what date you got there to Lucky Strike?
It had to be about...
June, May? June?
We got out, well, Patton got us the 29th of May, and so about 3 days later, must have been 30th or probably the 1st or 2nd of June.
Yeah, I see.
And then we left there by ship, steamship, the 6th of June, and...
you weren't at Lucky Strike very long then?
No. And then We were just about to Southampton when the war ended, when the lights went on, and all the anti-aircraft at Southampton. It was just like the most beautiful 4th of July celebration.
They all.
And we never got off the ship. It stayed there a few hours. And from there, it took, I think it was 4 days or just about a week to go to Brooklyn. And during this time, I was the commanding officer of the prisoners of war in that ship. Here, the officers were on top, and the enlisted men were down in the hold.
How many were on that? Was that an American?
Yeah, it was a big one of the it was Santa Maria, one of those 3 these Caribbean line.
Oh, I see.
And they made a troop ship out of it.
Quite a few.
Oh, yes.
POWs on board.
Oh gosh, there must have been must have been 4,000 or 5,000 men on board.
I see. Yeah.
And I was in charge of this Project R, this contingent that had to go to Brooklyn. From there, in charge of the men that they put on the cars, the Pullmans, to go to Fort Snelling. That's where my duty ended.
Yeah.
And that was sometime in May, towards the end of May, by the time we got to Fort Snelling.
End of June, you mean?
Yeah, that's right, end of June.
Yeah.
By the time we got to Fort Snelling.
And then you went from Fort Snelling to Dickinson.
Yes.
Yeah.
At Fort Snelling, I called home. We had been paid a little.
Yeah.
And I had some money, so I called my brother Dickinson. He was a dentist here at Dickinson. And my next of kin, that was always on my records. And I asked Mother to send some money. I needed some money. I'd found a motorcycle. Harley Davidson, one of the desert motorcycles.
We're in Fort Snelling?
They're at Minneapolis.
Oh, Minneapolis.
Just a little ways away from Fort Snelling.
Yeah.
And so that thing cost me $600. But it was a 4-cylinder, opposed, Harley Davidson shaft drive. It was a desert Harley. The thing would go straight up in the air. My God, for power. And I rode that thing to Dickinson, and from Dickinson out to San Jose, California.
Oh yeah, that's where they had that R&R or that.
Well, Santa Monica is where we had.
Yeah, Santa Monica. That's where I went.
And that's where we went for our R&R. But then at home, my wife had been working at Alameda Naval Station during the war for Douglas, and I had proposed to her because we had been going together before I went into the service. So she was home for her brother's graduation, and I found that out from my mother. So I called this country line, and this is 11 o'clock at night, and you know how a country line is. Click, 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 click. Everybody knew so that I was home and that Clara was supposed to get a extra couple of days.
Yeah.
So that was it. From there, I after that went to Douglas, Arizona, as commandant of cadets at the Advanced Flying School, Chinese B-25s.
At Douglas, Arizona. Where's Douglas located?
Straight south of Tucson, right on the border.
Oh, right.
Right on the Arizona-Mexican border.
Did they have an infantry base there one time?
Fort Huachuca.
Yeah.
Fort Huachuca.
Was that it? Right
west of there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Then that closed up, and I was transferred to the Spokane, Washington, Fairchild, as supply control officer, and also as surplus disposal officer. And then at a time there, we closed up Moses Lake, and then that's when everything was shutting down.
Shutting down. Yeah.
So I got out in, I think it was February 1947, and come back to North Dakota.
Yeah.
Been here ever since.
Yeah. Do you have any scars or any from the war that outside you mentioned?
No, outside of this, that's all.
Yeah.
And back again to this YB-40, then this time when the squadron commander says, George, get down to Bassingbourn. You all have heard of the Memphis Belle, Bob Morgan and his crew. Bob Morgan and I are real good friends. He's a personal friend of mine. Come out of the 92nd Bomb Group. over in England. He was transferred to the 91st. He was the first man to finish 25 missions with his crew. That day, he met the King and Queen of England. He had his B-17 parked, and I was 50 feet away. We were facing each other. The King and Queen and all the Air Force brass went and congratulated Bob and his crew. They got this DFCs. From there, they just walked 50 feet and met my crew. But they were in all Class A uniforms. That's why in that picture I look so disgusted. We were working on that YB-40. We were washing it off with gasoline and waxing and everything, and dirty clothes. Get down to basking boat. So that's the day I met the King and Queen of England and the entire crew.
Yeah, well, that's pretty good.
Yeah, and they went through the YB-40 then.
Are there any YB-40s left?
No, they were all changed back to the
17s.
The 17s.
Regular configuration.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's this picture here, the G model. That nose turret is from the YB-40, and they had another turret where the radio room is, but they took that out.
Yeah.
They made twin 50s in the waist instead of singles, so and they thought that would do just as well.
What do you have to say, George, about the war? What do you think about the war? I mean, any final statements you want to say about yourself or the war or your conditions you went through? Or
well, I think I was treated rather nicely during the war, and I've always had an advantage all the way through.
Yeah.
And I was given an awful lot of responsibility as a kid, and the war was won by kids.
Yeah.
There were a few senior officers, but it was still, the war was won by kids.
Well, and of course, you had a good background. You'd gone through the Depression.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, with no money, and you'd worked hard. I mean, from the time you were just a little kid, you had to start working.
That's right.
So when you stepped into the Air Force, responsibility and work and so on were part of your life.
That's why I joined the National Guard while I was going to college. That was my spending money.
Sure.
And my God, when I graduated as a second lieutenant on flight pay, $205 a month. And out of that, you had to pay all your clothes, your bachelor quarters, and your meals.
Yeah.
But still made payments on that car that I bought. So.
Yeah.
But I think that we lucked out by the skin of our teeth because of a dumb guy by the name of Hitler. If he'd have let his generals go, instead of making a fighter bomber out of that Me-262, the first jet airplane, they'd have blown us out of the sky.
Yeah, they might have. Yeah, that's right.
They had the 262 when I was shot down there at Sagan. Yeah. They had an aerodrome right next to it, and the 262s would take off.
Yeah.
The 51s, the 51 and the 47s, they'd have blown them out.
Yeah. Did you ever get back to Sagan after the war?
No, I don't want to go back there.
Well, I guess those places have been more or less eradicated.
That's right.
There's nothing left anyway.
And even the bases in England. Now, Poddington, which is another one of our bases, that's a racetrack now.
Yeah.
And Alconbury, that's up for sale.
Yeah. I know back in Stalag Luft 1, you know, all there is a little plaque out in the woods there.
Yeah, I imagine that's what's there.
Now, did you run into any concentration camp, Jewish concentration camp, and so on and so forth? Did you get involved in any of those or see them or anything like that?
No, I never did. But at Sagan, the Germans had these Russian prisoners, and they all looked like Mongolians. They're different look than what the Americans or the English were. Yeah. And we'd throw cigarettes or some of our ration over to them, and the Germans stopped us right away. Absolutely nothing. Those poor Russians were absolute dirt.
Did you ever run into the Cossacks? From Mongolia? Now, you mentioned these guys looked like Mongolians,
Yeah.
or maybe were.
Yeah, some of them could have been.
Yeah, but in our camp, see, they come, the Cossacks,
Oh,
from Mongolia, on a horse.
I
But
see.
that's a different story, of course.
Could have been some of my relatives in there.
That's right.
Yeah, because talk about a Cossack, my brother's half-brother was a Cossack that got my dad on a freighter out of the Black Sea to the United States when he was 17 years old.
I see, yeah.
So Dad was the first draft dodger in the family. Yeah, he was up for to enlist in the Russian army.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, George. You did a real good job, and I know that anyone who sees this tape will enjoy it, and I know your family will enjoy it, and I think we took enough time here so you could explain yourself. And
Well, I hope I come across that I knew what I was talking about.
well, I know you.
That
You
can
did real
understand.
well, George.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
So I want to congratulate you, and I want to congratulate the university here for putting, being with us.